once the ICC has jurisdiction over a territory, because the case was properly referred to them, as the case in Palestine was, then it has jurisdiction over any crimes committed in the territory, regardless of the nationality of the perpetrator. There is no legal avenue for us to sue U.S. officials in U.S. courts for these war crimes accordingly. And we have no choice but to seek the protection of the International Criminal Court. The Leahy Law prohibits the U.S. government from providing security assistance to abusive security forces. And this is a law that no State Department, not the Biden, not the Blinken, not the Obama, not the Bush, not the Clinton administrations have ever enforced against Israel.
Welcome to this episode of Expert Witness, a show on international law, human rights, and public policy. Today I'm joined by Sarah Leah Whitson, the executive director of the US-based rights group Dawn, following the organization's submission of a legal brief to the International Criminal Court in The Hague, urging Chief Prosecutor Karim Khan to investigate allegations of US complicity in Israeli war crimes in Gaza since October 2023. The ICC, the world's first permanent international criminal court, issued arrest warrants in November against Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his then Defense Minister Yoav Gallant over alleged war crimes and crimes against humanity committed against Palestinians in Gaza. Dawn's submission raises questions on whether the court will also issue warrants for US officials. The US has been the largest supplier of weapons and munitions to Israel during this war, with nearly 70% of Israel's military imports, and has continued to provide military and political support for Israel, despite growing evidence of war crimes and genocide in Gaza. And now Sarah joins us from New York to discuss her organization's ICC action and beyond. Sarah, it's great to have you with us today.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Could you please first begin by explaining your latest submission to the International Criminal Court and its significance?
Yeah, sure. So in January, we filed an Article 15 submission with the International Criminal Court. An Article 15 submission is a procedure under the Rome Statute, which governs the International Criminal Court, that allows civil society or other interested parties to submit evidence and information to the court. And what we submitted was really a complaint against three U.S. officials, Joe Biden, Antony Blinken, and Lloyd Austin, who were the President, Secretary of Defense, and Secretary of Treasury under the Biden administration. And we provide detailed evidence of how they violated Article 25 of the Rome Statute, which is aiding and abetting war crimes and other violations of the Rome Statute and facilitating these crimes. And basically, we provide detailed evidence of how these three officials provided military, political, and public support to facilitate Israeli crimes in Gaza.
Could you unpack that, please? Like, what's the sort of military, political, and public support that you mentioned in your evidence?
Yeah, so the military support is really the broad universe of ways in which the Biden administration and these three U.S. officials supported Israel in its commission of crimes in Gaza. So this includes the provision of nearly $20 billion of weapons since the start of the Gaza war. Which have been used indiscriminately and deliberately against civilians. It includes the active combat operations in support of Israel, for example, military strikes in Yemen, in Iraq, in Syria, in Lebanon against perceived critics, or rather perceived enemies of Israel, armed groups who are fighting Israel as part of this Gaza war. It includes intelligence that U.S. defense, U.S. intelligence gathered, and they provided to Israel to carry out their combat operations in Gaza. It includes backup military support, like the provision of multiple U.S. warships to the Mediterranean to act as a backup of defense, as well as making U.S. weapons stockpiles that are present in Israel available for Israeli use. So that's the military support. The political support includes very specific things that the US administration did to ensure that Israel could keep fighting. And the most significant example of that is the ceasefire resolutions that the Biden administration, that President Biden and Secretary Blinken ordered the US ambassador to the UN, Linda Thomas Greenfield, to make. And by vetoing these, I think it was seven, I'll have to go back and check, ceasefire resolutions, they ensured that Israel could continue to fight and that the international community could not intervene to stop Israel from committing war crimes in Gaza. And finally, the public support. These U.S. officials were very prominently seen in the international media, but specifically the U.S. media, justifying Israeli crimes, making excuses for Israeli crimes, even making information up about supposed crimes by Hamas, which of course turned out not to be true, specifically the beheading of babies, putting babies in ovens, claiming that there was mass and systematic rape, and so forth. So, with these false claims, coupled with their excuses and justifications for Israeli crimes, these U.S. officials provided Israel with the public support to ensure that the American public would keep supporting Israeli crimes in Gaza.
And Sarah, how about jurisdiction? We know that the US and Israel have repeatedly rejected the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court, saying that, first of all, they do not recognize Palestine as a state, which is the main basis of this jurisdiction in the situation of Palestine, and also that Israel is best placed to prosecute itself. So, what was the jurisdictional basis of your filing?
Yeah, sure. So, I'm glad you're asking this because people seem to be confused about it. So, the once the ICC has jurisdiction over a territory, because the case was properly referred to them as the case in Palestine was, then it has jurisdiction over any crimes committed in the territory, regardless of the nationality of the perpetrator, and regardless of whether or not the state of which the perpetrator is a citizen is a member of the court. And so this is why the International Criminal Court has jurisdiction over Israelis for the crimes committed in Gaza, even though Israel is not a party to the Rome Statute. And this is why the ICC has jurisdiction over American officials, even though the United States is not a party to the Rome Statute, just as the ICC has jurisdiction over Vladimir Putin and issued an arrest warrant against him for crimes committed in Ukraine, even though Russia is not a member of the International Criminal Court.
And how about the principle of complementarity? How have you been able to prove that it was not possible to prosecute these crimes within the U.S.?
We do indeed demonstrate that there is no complementarity in the US, both as a political matter, where it's very clear that though there's war crimes legislation in the United States, it is solely in the discretion of US government-appointed attorneys to bring such cases, and neither the Biden administration nor the Trump administration, of course, would investigate their own officials for war crimes. It's something they've only done against perceived enemies of the United States who happened to show up in our country. And there was one attempt to sue the Biden administration for supporting genocide in Gaza, but that case was dismissed on political grounds. And in fact, there is no legal avenue for us to sue U.S. officials in U.S. courts for these war crimes accordingly. And we have no choice but to seek the protection of the International Criminal Court.
Were you referring to the case that Dawn filed in the US in December?
No, that is a
Or is it
different.
different?
Yeah, that's a different case. So the case that Dawn filed against the State Department in December is very narrow and limited, and it really pertains to one particular law, the Leahy Law. The Leahy Law prohibits the U.S. government from providing security assistance to abusive security forces. And this is a law that no State Department, not the Biden, not the Blinken, not the Obama, not the Bush, not the Clinton administrations have ever enforced against Israel. And so that lawsuit is against the State Department itself for failing to enforce the Leahy laws in a manner that's arbitrary and capricious under something called the Administrative Procedure Act, which allows Americans or those who've been injured, not Americans, those who've been injured by the failure of an executive branch to enforce a law can sue to force them to enforce the law. So that's very limited. Even if we succeeded in that lawsuit, that would only pertain, for example, to U.S. military assistance, not arms sales, which is not governed by that law. Nor would it capture all of the other various ways in which these U.S. officials have provided Israel with support to carry out its crimes, such as the political support of the UN Security Council vetoes. And finally, this lawsuit is really, it's against the government itself, whereas the International Criminal Court is specifically designed to prosecute individual human criminals. And so that is also something that is not tied to our lawsuit.
Let's go back to the legal basis of your submission. You mentioned that you're accusing the U.S., the three U.S. officials, of aiding and abetting Israeli crimes in Gaza, and also intentionally contributing to Israeli war crimes and crimes against humanity in Gaza. Could you please talk a little bit about this article and how you've been able to prove the elements of a crime, which is like the element of knowledge and the act or omission, because this is like an accessorial kind of liability.
Yeah, so under Article 25 of the Rome Statute, there's really two forms of accessorial liability, and we argue that both of them were ones that these three officials committed. One is aiding and abetting crimes identified in the Rome Statute, and the other is facilitating the commission of crimes identified in the Rome Statute. And what we, in our submission to the ICC, demonstrate is that the three officials that we identify both committed substantial acts that substantially contributed to the crimes. And in fact, Israel and American officials have often admitted the extent to which Israel relies on U.S. weapons, depends on U.S. weapons. And the weapons that the United States provided did significantly contribute to crimes in Gaza, crimes with which the prosecutor and the court has already charged Israeli officials. We demonstrate how these U.S. officials knew that the provision of this support would facilitate the commission of crimes. Not only did they know, for example, that U.S. weapons were being used in the past to commit crimes, but that that would likely continue. They ignored the advice and recommendations of their own staff to halt arms transfers to Israel and to shift policies away from supporting Israeli atrocities. So they had knowledge of the crimes that were being committed using U.S. weapons. They even admitted that on some occasions when, for example, President Biden spoke about the Israel's indiscriminate attacks on civilians and how he wished they would stop. So we show both their action in providing a substantial contribution, but also their intent to continue to provide Israel with all of these means of military, political, and public support, knowing that they would be used to facilitate the commission of crimes against the Palestinian people in Gaza.
And have there been any legal precedents that you've cited in your submission?
Yeah, extensively. But basically, there is some jurisprudence of international criminal court precedent in cases, analyzing in legal decisions how the court interprets Article 25 of the Rome Statute, the elements of the crime that it looks at to demonstrate what constitutes aiding and abetting and facilitation of crimes, because that actually varies from court to court. It varies from law to law. There's no sort of universal criteria for the crime of aiding and abetting and facilitating crimes. And so we relied on the jurisprudence of prior ICC cases and what the judges have ruled as essential to finding aiding and abetting. And I would say that the cases where the court has found individuals criminally liable for aiding and abetting war crimes and crimes against humanity and so forth has been even a much lower bar, much lower standard in terms of the evidence that they were working with. Really war criminals who knew about how weapons were being used and didn't do more. What the Biden administration did is so far beyond what the statute requires that I think this is a very much a slam dunk case for what aiding and abetting liability looks like.
The reason why I asked about a precedent is um, the famous case of Charles Taylor, the former president of Liberia, who was convicted by the Special Court for Sierra Leone on the basis of aiding and abetting crimes in another country, which is Sierra Leone, by providing rebels with arms and munitions rather than committing the crime directly. So there seems to be a strong basis in case law historically similar to this case. But have you heard back from the prosecutor yet? What next do you expect?
No, we haven't. And typically the procedure is that the ICC does not respond to submissions. And I think that's important to preserve the integrity of the judicial process and the deliberations of the judicial process. What next happens is we will wait to see if the ICC chooses to investigate these U.S. officials for the crimes we have cited. And we hope very much that the court will take its responsibility to do this seriously and decide to proceed because, as I think everyone knows, the United States is trying to attack the court and Israel is trying to attack the court and they're trying to destroy the court. So it may well be that members of the court are a bit frightened right now because of the newly imposed sanctions against the prosecutor by the U.S. government and threats of additional attacks. But certainly hope that the member courts of the International Criminal Court stand firm and allow him to pursue this case with the full and robust resources and attention that it deserves.
And given the ICC sanctions, are you concerned about any legal risks to you as an American NGO due to your provision of evidence and like cooperation with the prosecutor who himself has been sanctioned?
Yeah, we filed our submission to the court in January before the Trump administration imposed these sanctions on the prosecutor, naming the prosecutor as the person that was being sanctioned under the executive order. So I think we were not therefore impacted by the new executive order for sanctioning cooperation with the court and basically making it a crime to provide support to a sanctioned individual. So far I think we're okay.
And politically within the U.S., do you expect any backlash by Congress, for example, due to the prosecution of U.S. officials?
Well, there hasn't been a prosecution of U.S. officials.
I mean, the possible.
Oh yeah, the possible prosecution,
Yeah.
possibly. We waited to publicize our submission because we didn't want to encourage passage of a bill that was pending in the US Congress that would have imposed much heavier sanctions on the court and not just the prosecutor, but the wide establishment of the court. And we didn't want to contribute or encourage the passage of that law. So we actually
Mhm.
waited till the law was defeated, which it very narrowly was, to publicize our submission.
And let's talk about Trump. Do you have any intention of taking any legal action against President Trump or members of his administration, given his decision to fast track the transfer of billions of U.S. dollars worth of arms to Israel, for example, 4 billion in March and 7 billion in February, and also in light of his sanctions on the ICC and his shocking declaration that he seeks to take over Gaza and turn it into a Riviera of the Middle East.
Yeah. As of right now, there's a ceasefire in place, and so these weapons are not being used to indiscriminately kill Palestinians in Gaza, nor has there been a new UN Security Council resolution that the Trump administration has vetoed. Obviously, the threats that Trump has made are harmful, and if implemented, would be war crimes that the United States and these officials would be contributing to. But that hasn't happened yet. Should it happen, we will absolutely explore bringing appropriate submissions to the court for crimes against Palestinians.
Sarah, thank you so much for joining us today. It was a pleasure to have you.
Well, thank you for having me.
You're welcome.